You're listening to the Old Time Radio Show on 71K News Talk Radio. Now back to Denver's Old Time Radio history buff, John Dunning.
And I am very happy today to have Frank Nelson. We all know this anyway, but Frank Nelson had a frequent but indefinable role on the Benny program. He played a floor walker, of course, in the Christmas show, which they did every year. He played a waiter in restaurants, in supermarkets. He played a salesman. He played a ticket seller at the railroad station. But on all of these parts, he had one common denominator and one personality trait. No matter what the situation, he was always Jack Benny's arch enemy. And that one magic word that he uttered every week always sent the audience into hysterics. Frank Nelson, are you on the phone?
Yes.
Yes? You're still doing that for McDonald's.
You know, no, I'm not just doing it for McDonald's now. I just finished doing it. I did it up until about the 10th of January. And the way I answered you just with the yes, you know, without stretching it or anything, I have to tell you a story about a director that came on the Benny Show at a particular point in time. And so we were sitting around the table reading, and Jack said, "Oh, Mr. And I said, "Yes." And we went on through the thing, and when we were through and going to do the rehearsal on mic, he walked up to me and he said, "Frank, don't do that." And I said, "What?" He said, "Don't do that." I said, "Don't do what?" He said, "Well, you know how you said the yes." He said, "Don't do that." I said, "Oh, all right." So get up there, and Jack said, "Oh, Mister," and I said, "Yes." Jack said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, the director told me not to do that." And Jack turned around, and he said, "Have you ever seen my show or heard my show?" And the director said, "Well, no, I haven't." He said, "Well, he's been doing that for 30 years. That's what I pay him to do."
It was probably the most famous one word in certainly that I can think of in all of the old-time radio I've heard.
Well, it lasted for 38 years, so I guess it had something.
38 years. Well, you must have started on it very early then.
Well, I started with Jack actually on June 1st, 1934. I wasn't doing the yes then. I was just doing parts with him. And, I'd say about 6 months into my association with him, one week I happened to stretch it. And the writers the next week said, "Hey, we're going to try that again." I said, "Try what?" They said, "Well, you remember you stretched out a yes and it got a laugh last week?" And I had to think about it. And I said, "Oh, yeah, I remember." So I did, and so then we would, they one day decided they'd see what I could do with ooh, and so they haven't really cued Jack in. And Jack's line was, you really do hate me, don't you?" And I said, "Ooh, do I?" And he fell right on the floor. Right on the floor. But
this was in rehearsal, right?
Huh?
This was in rehearsal.
Oh, yeah.
He could also break up on the air, though.
Oh, yes. Oh, he broke up many times on the air. Many times on the air. You know, it's fun to talk to you in Denver. I don't think you know this probably, but first broadcast I ever did was at KOA in Denver.
Really?
Yep, I started my career in 1926. I was still a kid in high school, and I did a show for the United States National Bank with a young lady by the name of Georgia Miller, and she was the wife and I was the husband in a series, and I went out to audition for it, and they looked at me and said, "What are you doing out here?" And I said, "Well, they told me you had something to be auditioned for," and they said, "Oh, well, this is a man of about 35 years of age." I said, "Oh, well, okay," and I started to leave, and the director said, "Well, look, have you ever read over a microphone?" I said, "No," and he said, "Well, maybe you'd like to stay and read," and I said, "Well, yeah, sure." So I did, and there were 30 of us that auditioned that day, and the next day they called back 12, next day they called back 4, and I got it. So I worked that, and then I worked at KFEL in Denver. I sold time and announced there. And I opened Denver University's little theater doing marchbanks in Canada in either 28 or 29. So I have many good memories of Denver. My mother had a dress shop, as a matter of fact, at 412 East Colfax, opposite the cathedral there.
You really do know Denver, then.
Oh, yes, I do.
Well, I may have missed it. Maybe you already told me, but how did you happen to be in Denver in the first place?
Well, I went through, I went to Maury Junior High there, and I went to West High School there and graduated from West. So I lived there for a long time.
Well, did you, you mentioned KOA. Don Wilson was on KOA, wasn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Did you know him here then?
No, I didn't know Don. I think Don left there a little before I did, and I don't remember Don, and I don't think we met there at all. I met him at KFI out here when I came out here.
Did you read Irving Fine's book?
Did I read what?
Irving Fine's book on Jack Benny?
No, I didn't read Irving's book. Irving is my pet hate.
Is he?
Yes, he is.
Well, you'll probably hate this anecdote in there. He says you got the most money for one word of anybody in radio or television until that time.
Well, that's a marvelous theory that he has. You see, Irving hated like the devil to turn loose of a buck. It just hurt him terribly. Jack didn't, but Irving did. And Jack didn't know what Irving did sometimes. For instance, I'll give you a story about Irving. One week I got a call from the casting director, and he said, Frank, I'd like to have you on the show. This is in the television days. I'd like to have you on the show this week, but you're just voiceover. You're at the airport, and you're just coming over the PA, and so Irving thought that maybe you'd work for half of your regular salary. And I said, tell that, and I got just about that far, and he said, never mind, I'll call you back. So in about 20 minutes, he called back, and he said, okay. He said, see you tomorrow in your regular salary. And he said, now I'm going to tell you what happened. He said, Irving said, I'm not going to pay Nelson's salary to do this thing, so get another actor. So he said, I got another actor. The other actor went on stage, and as soon as Jack said something, and this fellow started to talk, Jack said, where's Frank? And Irving says, well, I thought, he says, where's Frank? He said, get Frank. Irving says, yes, sir. So it ended up that he had to pay the other actor, and then he had to pay me my regular salary, so it cost him more than it would have to begin with.
Well, this anecdote he reports in...
It's always that way.
Yeah, he indicates that in the book, because he was the Jack Benny's producer at the time, I believe.
Yes, he was, originally he was his accountant, and then he ended up being his producer, finally. And of course, he's now George Burns' manager.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I think the anecdote is kind of revealing, because he talks in here about how he didn't want to pay your fee to come in and do this. Basically, what they needed was the yes. He didn't want to pay the fee for that, and so he took it to Benny, at least as he has it in the book. And Benny says, of course we have to pay his fee. He's entitled to get his fee for the one word or whatever else he does. And they, according to Fine, they had a big conference with all the writers to decide whether the one word on this particular show was a big enough laugh to get the fee, and they went ahead and paid the fee because they decided it was.
Well, I'll give you 100 to 1 right now that isn't the way it happened, because if he wouldn't have dared go to Jack and ask that. He simply wouldn't do that. Jack would expect me to be there if the character was in.
And he certainly expect you to get paid for it.
That's right. And Jack would never have raised the issue about money. In the first place, with the kind of money Jack was making, it didn't make any difference. What he was going to pay me, when you figure what he was going to pay the government, it just didn't make that much difference. Matter of fact, I made a lot more money on other shows than I made on the Jack Benny show.
The revealing thing, I think, about that anecdote, even that he would tell it, it reveals that Jack Benny's character was the exact opposite of what he went to great lengths to promote on the air.
But Jack was a very generous man, actually. He was a very charitable man. And, for instance, he would give $25,000, let's say, to Jewish war relief during the war, with the stipulation that there be no publicity. There was another comedian out here that would give $5,000 with the stipulation there'd be a lot of publicity. That was the difference between the two. But Jack was just that kind of a human being. When Mel was in that terrible auto accident, he was in a coma for 21 days. Jack sat at his bedside all that time.
This is Mel Blanc.
That's right. And he did the same with Eddie Anderson when Eddie had a stroke. He was out there at the hospital daily. He was a very, very decent and lovely man. He was not an easy man to know, to socialize with, or anything like that. Now, Mel socialized with him a fair amount of time, but I never did socialize with Jack. But I certainly enjoyed working with him, and I admired him as a human being.
One of the things I loved about the Benny Show was how, if they blew a line, they would play on it and build on it throughout the...
Oh, yeah.
I was wondering if some of that wasn't... If some of those lines maybe weren't blown in dress rehearsal and built into the show, or if
No.
They were actually blown on the air.
That's right. For instance, Mary had one where she came in and I was the soda jerk, and she said, "I'll have a Chiss-Squeeze sandwich." And that played for weeks. And that happened on the show. It did not happen in rehearsal.
Those running gags were just fantastic.
That's right. Another one was when Harris had Manischewitz, you know. I mean, he just garbled it, and they did Manischewitz for a long time. I'll tell you the most famous one, probably. I don't know whether it's in his book or not, but it probably is. Don Wilson had a line early in the show. Oh, first, I have to back up to myself. I had a line, and Jack says, "Oh, Mr. I say, "Yes." He said, "Are you the doorman?" I said, "Well, who do you think I am in this uniform? Nelson Eddy?"
That's the one. I'll just let you tell that. I was going to read it, but I'll let you tell it.
Okay, so he said, Nelson Eddy, and he said, "You know, I don't like that joke for Frank. We got to get a different joke." He said, "I don't like the Nelson Eddy joke." Well, we get to show, and they haven't changed the joke. Now, early in the show, Don Wilson had a line about Drew Pearson, the famous columnist, and it came out Dreer Poosin. Well, that got a tremendous laugh out of the audience and broke Jack up. Now I look up at the booth, and the writers are motioning to me to come into the booth. So I get up and go back and walk in the booth. I said, "What do you want?" They said, "Look, when you get to the line, it says, 'Are you the doorman?' Say, 'Well, who do you think I am in this uniform?' Dreer Poosin." I said, "Come on, fellas, it doesn't even track." They said, "Never mind whether it tracks, do it." I said, "Now look, nobody ad-libs with Jack, and you know that." They said, "We will take the responsibility for having given you the line." I think if it had died out there, they'd have all said he did it on his own. I don't know. But anyway, I went back out, and now we get to the thing, and Jack said, "Oh, Mr. and I always had my back to him, and I whirled into the mic, and I said, 'Yes.' And he said, 'Excuse me, are you the doorman?' And as he said it, I saw this dull look come into his eyes like, 'Oh, good Lord, here comes that line I don't want to hear.' And I stared right into his eyes, and I said, 'Well, who do you think I am in this uniform, Dreer Poosin?' Well, his eyes got like two saucers. He began to laugh. He grabbed a hold of the microphone. He slid down the microphone to the floor, pounded on the floor, got up, staggered clear across the stage to the far wall, turned around into the curtains, got a hold of the curtains, slid down the curtains, pounded on the floor some more, got up and staggered back to the mic, and the laugh is going on through this whole thing.
This is all live.
That's all live. And it went on through the whole thing. Now he gets back to the microphone. I thought he'd never, get back to the script. And I really think that this is probably the longest laugh we ever had on the Benny Show.
Longer than your money or your life?
Yeah, I think it was longer than that. I think it was, but it wasn't planned, you see. It just happened. And so then, for weeks after that, I would run into writers from other shows, and they'd say that whole thing was a planned routine, wasn't it? I said, no, it was not. And I'd tell them this story very much as I've told you, and they all thought I was lying to them. There wasn't a one of them was convinced that I was telling them the truth, and it's absolutely the way it happened.
There was a wonderful one that Mary blew. In fact, I even said on the air, I really think that must have been done in rehearsal, and apparently I'm wrong, but there was a wonderful line that she blew where she was supposed to say, he says, "Where's my car?" And she says, "It's up on the grease rack." And she says, "It's up there on the grass reek." And they used that for about 3 or 4 weeks running. I think there was a line in there about a couple of skunks getting out, and they're over there, boy, that grass reeks, or something like that. The writers were ingenious at turning.
Oh yeah, once anything like that happened, they would pick it up. No, Mary, you couldn't write that kind of a breakup for Mary because she wouldn't be able to do it. She just wouldn't be able to handle that kind of a thing and make it sound like anything but a phony thing. No, there was never a single one of those things that was written into the script. Oh, well, we bounced from show to show. Of course, I did Blondie. I did my first Blondie in 1939 and did the last one on January 12th of 1950. And in that, I played Herb Woodley, the next-door neighbor.
Right.
And so we bounced from show to show. I was one of the two announcers. I was the billboard announcer on Lux Radio Theater for 2.5 years.
When was that?
Well, at the beginning of Lux Out Here. I'd have to look at my books to tell you the exact date of it, but when it first came out here, I did the billboard announcing and then doubled into the show. And just looking to see if I could pick up a date on it here, but I don't know if I can.
I wanted to ask you while you're looking about Phil Harris, whose shows survive in such wonderful sound and are so obviously influenced by Jack Benny.
Oh, sure. Well, he had the Frankie, the banjo player, was supposed to be his sidekick in that.
Right.
And it was patterned to a great extent after what he had learned, really, with Jack. I can tell you a little story about Rochester and how he got on the Benny Show.
Okay.
The only time that I ever turned Jack down in my life, I would get out of other shows. This is before I was contracted to him, and I'd get out of other shows in order to do his show. Well, he called me one week quite late, and I already had 4 commitments for Sunday, and I said, there's just no way I can do it. I'm sorry. What he wanted me to do was a porter on a train coming from Albuquerque. And it's a very fortunate thing that I was busy and they couldn't get me, because they went out and they got a young man by the name of Eddie Anderson. And Jack was so impressed by him that he said, hey, we got to find a spot for him on the show. And he became his valet on the show. That's the way he got on the show.
Maybe you almost had the role of the Rochester guy.
Well,
it
never would have developed that way.
No,
It'd just have been a one-shot if I'd have done it. But because he had this very distinctive voice and all, Jack was so intrigued with him, he said, hey, we got to do something else besides this porter bit.
Right. But what I mean is you almost got the role that in other words, if you had done that show, maybe there wouldn't have been any Rochester.
That's right. That is correct.
I think that was around Easter 1937, wasn't it?
I couldn't give you the date. I really don't remember.
It went back a ways, though.
Yeah, long ways.
Elliot Lewis was another one who was on Benny's show a lot, wasn't he?
Well, Elliot used to come on, and he did what they called the moolie. We called him a moolie. He'd be kind of a goofy guy, And we did a routine. We did one routine between Elliot and myself that turned out to be just an absolute screamingly funny routine, and we were scared to death of it, because if it died early, you were dead, because you had to go on with it. You couldn't get off of it. And what it was, he gets up to the line ahead of Jack to get a ticket. And he says, I'd like a ticket for Glockamora. And I said, yes, sir. He said, is that little brook still, how are things in Glockamora? I said, fine, just fine. He says, is that little brook still running there? I said, yes, it is. And we did every line of the song that way. And it just kept building, and of course Jack doing the looks behind him. And it went from the beginning of the song to the end with every one of the lyrics, and it just kept building and building and building. Then they tried it. It was so successful, they tried it again with another song about a year later, and it died of boring. And we still had to do it because there was no way out of it, you see.
Was that the Tennessee Waltz?
I'm not sure. I don't remember what it was. I don't think I really want to remember what it was, because it just died, that's all.
Josephsburg, in his book, recounts that you and I believe it was Elliot Lewis did the Tennessee Waltz that way.
Well, then probably we did. That's probably the second one. Only the one that really played was How Are Things in Glockamora.
Yeah, I think that's in Irving Fine's book.
Yeah.
That's wonderful comedy when you can build something like that into.
Oh, it was just tremendous, and yet you can see what a chancy kind of a routine it was, because if it didn't start to play right from the beginning, you were going nowhere except downhill for a long time.
Right. Fred Allen used to do some great things with music. Did you ever work with him?
Yes, I worked with Allen when he was working with Jack on about I think 2 or 3 shows where Allen was on, when they had the feud going,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What's your opinion of Fred Allen?
Oh, I think he was born like 20 years too soon. The kind of comedy that he did that was so magnificent, and he was the comedian's comedian. Every comedian adored him, thought he was the greatest thing that ever came down the pike. But he was too sharp for the people, generally speaking. And then comedy began to change, and I think he would have done very, very well on today's market, or back a piece from now even. But I just think he was a little before his time. You see, he never had a high rating, and yet every comedian loved him.
Listen, when you do a campaign like McDonald's, and when there, the tie-in to the Jack Benny Show, which has been gone now for the radio show has been gone now for 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
your tie to that is so subtle. A whole generation of viewers are going to look at those spots and probably not know what they're doing. How does McDonald's come up with something like that, or what?
Well, as I understand it, the head of Needham, Harper and Steers. You want the boring story of how I got the commercial?
Sure.
All right. I got a call one day from AFRA out here. AFRA called me and said that they wanted me to call Chicago, Needham, Harper and Steers, and talk to a lady by the name of Virginia Dalton about some McDonald's commercials. So I called her, and I said, I don't understand why you don't have my phone number. I don't even have an agent anymore. And I said, I don't understand why you don't have my phone number, because I've done 4 commercials for you. And she said, well, we're a big agency. There are 4 floors here, and one floor doesn't necessarily know what the other's doing, but would you be interested? And I said, yeah, sure. So about 20 minutes passed, and she called back, and she said, Frank, I checked on those commercials. Those were voiceover. And I said, yes. She said, well, this is on camera. And then this is the way an actor sells himself. I said, what in the hell do you want with me on camera? And there was a pause, and she said, well, we thought we might. And I said, well, if you do, okay, but I can't figure out what you want with me on camera. So then on the following Monday, I was called to go out into Burbank and do an audition at a small studio out there, and I went out there, walk in, and a young man, 26 years old, walks out of the back room, and he said, I'm Bill Brichta of Needham, Harper and Steers, and I wrote the commercials. And I said, oh, I know. You're going to tell me that your mother used to carry you into the theater in her arms, and you watched me perform. And he said, no. He said, I know the character, and our boss is a great fan of the Benny Show. So that's supposedly where it came from. So I then did the commercials, and when we got all through, he said, no, I can't go back to Chicago without autographs. And I thought, oh, come on, you're putting me on. And so he brought these 5 scripts in that I had done, and I said, first one he said is to so-and-so. I said, now, who is that? He said, that's the head of Needham, Harper and Steers. I said, by all means. So I autographed each of these, the people he asked me to autograph them to, and left and came home and said to my wife, there isn't a snowball of a chance in hell of my getting that job, because anytime you get all that kind of treatment, nothing happens. 3 days later, they called and said they wanted me to do it. And the funny thing is, that's the first time McDonald's has ever done anything except real people, just folks doing commercials. And actually, it's the biggest single campaign they have ever done. They called me 2 weeks into the campaign and said that McDonald's was so happy with it, they were putting an additional $500,000 into network advertising. So it evidently was a very successful campaign for them, and I'm happy to have worked for them, and I got a kick out of doing it. And you're talking about the character. The very strange thing happened. You see, I wondered. I thought, now, what are the kids going to think about this today? It's a long time since my son used to come home from school and say, Dad, I am sick of you, because all the kids in school were doing the yes. Okay, all the kids back doing it again. All the kids, they go into McDonald's and they say, I'll have a hamburger, and they say, Big Mac, yes, and they're all doing this bit. And I have had kids run up and rap on my window, and I roll the window down, and they do the yes at me and then run. And it's strange, but the young people have picked up on it just exactly as they did back in the Benny days.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah, it is.
Your wife, Viola Vaughn,
yep,
was also on the Jack Benny Show for...
And she used to do a lot of femme fatales. If there was a sexy French gal or a sexy Italian girl or whatever it happened to be. She did a lot of those. She worked with Bob Hope a great deal. She did Mademoiselle Fifi with Eddie Cantor. And, of course, she hasn't been working at it. I'll tell you what we do now. We have a thing that we do called the Golden Days of Radio. And so she and I do the Bickersons now.
Really?
Yeah. We have a lot of fun doing that.
How often was she on the Benny program?
Well, she used to, sometimes she would stand by. If Mary wasn't feeling too well, Mary used to faint a lot.
Really?
Yeah, she'd have spells when she would faint, and sometimes, boy, she'd hit that stage, and that was it. And usually it would be after the show, right at the conclusion of the show. I don't remember Mary ever fainting during a show, but I sure remember her fainting a great many times after a show.
What, did she have mic fright?
I don't know. I don't know whether it was that or just a general nervousness or what the devil it was. I really don't know. But if she was not feeling too well, they would often have Viola down there just to stand by, just in case something happened to her, just to pick up and do her lines. But there are other times they would have her in there doing, as I say, the femme fatale type of thing.
Did she substitute for Mary later after she left the show?
No, she never substituted for Mary as such.
Now, Mary Livingston actually left the program because of the fact that the pressures...
She wouldn't do the television shows. She just wouldn't do them.
She left the radio...
They trapped her into doing one, but I mean, she just wouldn't do them.
I believe she left the radio show, too.
Well, she may have towards the end. I really don't remember that. Now, Viola might know more about that than I do. She might have stood in for her on an occasion. I really don't know. I've said she hadn't, but I could be wrong on that.
You know, we played one the other night from 1954, and the actress who was playing the part was good, but there was such a difference. She didn't have that bite. And
now, Mary was Mary, I mean, and when you've done a thing that long, you don't try to step into somebody else's shoes unless it's just a necessity. You just have to do it, that's all. Because you're never going to be compared favorably.
That's right. We have one more caller here. Hello, this is John Dunning here on 71 K News Talk Radio.
I'd like to ask what was the most funny or embarrassing thing that ever happened to you in radio?
Good question. Did you get that?
What was the
funniest and the most embarrassing?
Well, I really think that the Dreer Pooson story that I told you earlier was probably the funniest. I got more of a kick out than anything out of the reaction of Jack, I mean, it was it just broke him up so completely that I would say that's about as funny as anything that happened to me. Embarrassing, I don't know. It's embarrassing when you make a mistake. It's embarrassing when you do something on a dramatic show like I did once when I had a very dramatic scene which the first act ended with, "You've killed my boy." And, no, "You've killed my son" was the line. Mm-hmm. And I started to say boy and tried to change back, and it came out, "You've killed my soy." Now, that leaves you in a fine state of affairs, and now I have to go back and do the second act, and I'm thinking, oh my God, a highly dramatic show, and I did a thing like that. And then the director, having no heart at all, handed me a little note just as I'm going to open the second act, and I flip it open, and it says, "My little soy, how have you been?" And then I practically couldn't go on. I practically couldn't get the words out.
You hear a lot about things that happen on the air, in line with this caller's question, where there are a lot of games played on the air. I don't know if this happened on shows like the Benny Show, where you would be on mic and somebody would come and jerk your pants down or set.
Oh, we used to do that to each other all the time in the early days, before, not on network shows, but when I was working locally here, we used to do that all the time.
Well, what is your
most would walk into the booth naked, and throw you a cue. We're supposed to do the news now.
They would throw you a cue naked from the booth?
Yep.
Yeah, I was going to ask your most memorable experience in Denver radio, since you said you worked here.
Well, I guess, yes, I did. As I say, the first thing that I did was this show for a bank back there, in which I played the husband. I was about 15, I think, and the young lady was a beautiful redhead of 32. If I had known then what I know now, I could have enjoyed the part more, I'm sure. But I remember one thing that happened to me on that. I think probably in all of my career in radio, I missed exactly one broadcast. And that didn't happen to be in Denver, but I was taken by ambulance and carried in on a stretcher while I was doing that series, and from the stretcher played the husband one night. Wow. And the one time that I actually missed a show was when I went back with Jack to New York, and I got out of bed. I had a fever of 104. I got out of bed, went down in a snowstorm, and did the first show. And when he found out that I was that ill and that the doctor had allowed me to get out of bed, he was ready to kill somebody. And, of course, he would not allow me to come back and do the second show, and so the writers fought for the privilege of doing my part on the second show. And that's the only show that I ever missed in my whole career in radio.
Frank, we are coming up on the hour. I really have enjoyed having you on. I would love to have you back. I hate to monopolize your life, but I've only touched on one show today, and I would like to talk about some of the other things you've done. And I would also like to have your wife on if that could be arranged.
Well, sure, why not?
Okay, well, thanks much for being with us.
You betcha, John. And you let us know.
I sure will. We'll talk to you again.
Right.
Okay, that was Frank Nelson, wonderful actor from the Jack Benny Show and other programs.